Everywhere you look, the rich history of the United Kingdom is there to be seen. But hidden beneath our feet, there's still a wealth of archaeological treasure just waiting to be found. That's why each year, all across the country, our archaeologists dig, dive, and explore their way down.
Oh my God! Some of the best stuff you're ever going to see.
Oh wow.
Look at this.
We got an arrowhead.
Searching for fresh discoveries.
Hypercaust.
Revealing the imprint of ancient civilizations.
It's been there for 5,500 years.
And unearthing fascinating objects.
Fantastic decoration.
Any musket balls yet, Aaron?
Wow, look at that.
Loving it though.
Every dig adds new pieces to the ever-growing archaeological jigsaw that is the epic story of our islands.
And I'm down.
This year I visit digs in some extraordinary locations and solve mysteries using cutting-edge tools.
Oh, this is wonderful.
I'm joined by a trio of expert investigators.
So you can see how that gives you a really unique signature.
That's right. Excellent. So they were using food as a type of bribery.
Who dig deeper to answer the questions raised by the finds.
That's how he got away with it.
Exactly.
Finally, the archaeologists bring their best discoveries into our tent
Yeah, it's a cracking find.
for up-close analysis.
So it's completely unique impression. That's wonderful.
Welcome to Digging for Britain. This time we're seeking out the best digs and discoveries in the south of Britain. On the Kent coast, we raise the wreck of a medieval ship in stunning condition.
Some of the samples we've had feel so fresh that you can still smell the tar.
We discover that Bishop Stortford may be built on a previously unknown Roman town.
We've been absolutely blown away by the scale of what we've found so far.
And I explore beneath perhaps the most famous castle in the world.
See, it's got a splash of gold along here.
Yeah, just this edge here.
To uncover evidence of Henry VIII's industrial scale fraud.
And he was known as Old Copper Nose.
There you go. That's why.
Throughout history, the south of Britain has often been the first point of contact with the continent for the spread of ideas, culture, and people, as well as the front line for any invading armies, like the Romans, who changed Britain forever. We know that the Romans built plenty of forts, garrisons, and towns across Britain, and many of them have been extensively archaeologically investigated, and we even know the names of some of them. But others, it seems, have slipped under the radar to lie forgotten in the landscape for centuries. It seems extraordinary that an entire town could disappear in this way, but it's even more exciting when it suddenly reappears. Our first dig takes us to Bishop Stortford, 22 miles south of Cambridge. The Domesday Book tells us that in 1086 there were just 29 households here. Then, throughout the medieval period, it grew, developing into the familiar market town we see today. Little is known, though, about life here before this time. But we do know a crucial ancient road passed through this area, built by the Romans. This vital road was called Stane Street. It linked St Albans to Colchester, and here it crossed the River Stort. But very little evidence of Roman settlement has ever been found at Bishop Stortford. Now, planned upgrades to a leisure centre are giving a team from Oxford Archaeology a chance to investigate the town's ancient past. The road itself is easy to identify.
So this is Stane Street. Stane Street.
These stones are the ones that were laid by the Romans to make the surface of their road that they walked on about 2,000 years ago.
But it's discoveries being made alongside the road which has county archaeologist Greer Dewdney so excited.
This here is a stone building that we've got on site. And we are now starting to think that it is possible that it's actually a temple structure. That's really exciting because that adds another facet to this whole settlement. It gives another reason for people to stop on their passage along Stane Street and visit this place.
This stone-built structure is good evidence that a community lived here, and the sheer amount of small personal items being unearthed is a strong sign of how big that community was.
There's a Roman coin here.
Oh, lovely.
You can just make out his head there.
As well as coins, the team is turning up hundreds of pieces of Roman pottery, animal bones, and intriguing decorative objects. Neil Mason is supervising the dig.
This is my personal favourite from the site so far. It's made from copper alloy, and it's a lion's head fitting. Initially, when it came up with the metal detector, we thought it was quite modern, just because it's in such good condition. It's normally the kind of thing you see in a museum.
More evidence for the scale of the Roman community here is emerging on the other side of the site, where the team have uncovered a large cemetery.
We've got a lot more burials than we were expecting. We were expecting around 20 or 30, and we've actually got something like 60 to 70 so far. What's nice about this particular burial is we have the surviving grave marker, or at least a portion of it. We've been absolutely blown away by the scale of what we've found so far.
The wealth and density of finds suggests a sizable population lived here. Could this be an undiscovered Roman town?
It's only with this excavation that we're starting to understand just how significant, both regionally and nationally, this site could be.
And this hopefully is only the tip of the iceberg of what we might uncover as the excavation continues.
During the weeks after our visit, the discoveries at Bishop Stortford's Roman settlement kept on coming. To get the latest on just how big the settlement was and who was living there, I invited project manager Andy Grief to the Digging for Britain tent with some of the best finds and a new survey image of the site.
Andy, you've got a plan of your excavations against these kind of ghost-like images. What is that?
Those are crop marks visible from satellite imagery, and they really show that this settlement is far more extensive than the bits that we've seen in our excavations.
Yeah. Was there any idea that there would be this level of Roman activity?
It came as a bit of a surprise to everyone. We had no idea that the settlement was so expansive or so sort of busy as well, busy and rich.
And this was an incredibly finds-rich excavation.
Absolutely, yes.
The quantity and variety of high-quality costume adornments suggests the presence of some very well-dressed Romans.
I want to start with these beautiful copper alloy objects. I mean, we've got some lovely brooches here, lots of different styles. Are they from different centuries?
A lot of our brooches are sort of 2nd and 3rd century. We've got some really nice examples of military-style brooches.
So military personnel in the area?
Yes.
That's lovely. And then over here we've got something a bit different, haven't we? Because those look like hairpins.
Exactly, so more sort of evidence of women at the settlement and of personal care and hygiene, really, as well.
And what's this?
That's actually a mirror, or part of a mirror. It's a fragment of a mirror.
That's a rare object, isn't it?
You don't find them very often at all, no.
No. So it's copper alloy, probably bronze.
And just polished up to a shine.
Yeah. And wonderful to still have that mirrored surface. Can't quite see myself in it, but it's almost there.
And that came out of the ground shining, so you can imagine how that was for someone to find.
Yeah. And this, I think, is wonderful because this is a piece of pretty classic Samian ware, but there's this.
That's called a pot mend, where they've put back together a broken piece of pot.
So we tend to think of Samian ware as being, in some ways, high status, but also vast quantities of it are being made in Gaul and shipped over. But, obviously, whoever owned this one liked it enough that they didn't just throw it away and get a new one, that they actually mended it.
Well, even connected to the continent as they are in this settlement, it's still an expensive piece of pottery to have. So
Yeah.
you'd mend it if you could.
Yeah. Those are lovely personal and decorative objects, but also you've got some coins, so these are fantastic for dating. So what do these tell us about the longevity of the settlement?
Well, we've got coins from the 1st century all the way through to the 4th century, so that we know that activity on the site lasted for that long.
OK, so who've we got? This is like a who's who of Roman emperors. That is Claudius, the emperor who headed up the invasion. So that's 1st century.
Absolutely.
What about this one? Looks like it might be legible as well. That's Maximian.
He's right at the end of the 3rd century.
Really lovely little portrait on that one. And then some smaller coins here. Do they tend to get smaller through time?
Absolutely. If you're getting smaller Roman coins, they're generally going to be 4th century. So we know that this settlement, which we think was established towards the end of the 1st century, stayed in use in some form or other for several hundred years.
Yeah, yeah. So how does this add to our knowledge? What does this tell us about Roman Stortford that we didn't know before?
Well, it tells us that a lot more activity took place in this part of Hertfordshire than was previously known. You'd have seen people from all walks of life, and this excavation, along with the crop mark evidence, really shows the scale of this site.
It's big enough to be called a town.
It certainly is, yes.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for bringing these in. They've got stories to tell.
Let's gather ourselves to the heavens above. We can always come back, my love.
In the centuries after the Romans withdrew, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms began to form in the southeast of England. Regions with familiar names like Sussex and Essex date from this time, the early medieval period. One of the most powerful early medieval kingdoms straddled the centre of the island. Its name was Mercia. And our next dig takes place at its southern gateway, the village of Cookham, 14 miles northeast of Reading.
This is the Thames. It was an incredibly important trade route all through the centuries. And here in Cookham, there's a church which we know goes back to Norman times, but archaeologists believe that it has a much earlier foundation and that it once was at the heart of a large monastic settlement, a monastic settlement that's associated with one of the most influential people in early medieval Britain. Her name was Queen Cunithryth.
When her husband, King Offa, died in 796, Cunithryth became Queen of Mercia. Tantalisingly, we know she spent the later years of her life at a monastery somewhere here in Cookham, but no one has ever found a trace of it. Now, a team from the University of Reading is on the hunt, here, next to the church. Gabor Thomas is leading the dig.
So this church obviously draws the eye today, and there are elements of it that are medieval, possibly bits of it that do go back to the Norman period. But you think this was a site for an earlier monastic settlement then?
So there very likely was a precursor to this church standing in Anglo-Saxon times. And 9 times out of 10, you find that the Anglo-Saxon version of the church is either under the footprint of the Norman successor or very close by. And there could have been maybe a settlement or a complex, so that's a possible sort of scenario here.
Gabor's geophysical surveys in the field alongside the church showed tantalising clues of archaeological remains. So he set up his department here and sent in his students.
I am currently in a hole at Cookenfield School, and I'm going to show you how we've progressed since day one. And what we've managed to do is dig a series of slots from east to west.
The huge area of land they've stripped hasn't been used since medieval times, which is great news for their quest to find evidence of the monastery and perhaps the famous Anglo-Saxon queen herself.
Ivy, it needs to come that way.
It's going to be very similar.
Yep, there you go.
It's been a very busy few weeks.
So here we have a hole, which we believe they dug to retrieve building material.
And in the big trench, the team is finding evidence of a vibrant Anglo-Saxon community that might have supported a monastery.
I'm looking at that patch of pale gravel running through the middle. Is that something archaeological?
Yes, it is. It's really significant. It's an Anglo-Saxon street surface.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's the actual road surface?
That's right. The Anglo-Saxon people that lived in this settlement would have walked across.
Right, can we get down in the trench and have a look at some of these features then?
Absolutely, let's go.
A stone road like this is an extraordinary feature for an early medieval settlement.
I mean, it's well constructed, this road, isn't it? It's not just a, thin veneer of material over the top of a trackway.
That's right. You don't get engineered roads like this in typical Anglo-Saxon settlements. It's telling us something about its special status, in other words.
Yeah.
The team are also finding traces of buildings where food was prepared on a large scale.
We've identified some hearths in a row, there and there. So we're saying it's a medieval Greggs setup.
So you've got large buildings here, a really significant road running up through the middle of it. Inside these buildings, we've got bread ovens, we've got hearths. It doesn't feel particularly ecclesiastical at this point.
Yeah, that's all about production and, if you like, servicing the community that lived here.
This is what keeps it all going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In their search for traces of monastic life, the team has opened a second trench on the other side of the site.
One of the things we were prepared to come across was burials, and we have, but in a way that we wouldn't have expected. Here is the ditch, and that little spot there, I don't know if you can see it, is where we lifted the skull. And then over here are the legs.
The cemetery here has been damaged by much later medieval rubbish pits and boundary ditches.
There's a real jumble, isn't there? Because I can see the bottom of two tibiae there, the shin bones, and the fibulae next to them. And then I think that's a humerus that's kind of sticking out at an angle there. And there's a skull as well.
That's right. We're dealing with quite a tightly packed cemetery here.
And do you think it's possible that Cynethryth herself was buried here?
I think there's a very high chance that she was buried here. That would be very much the standard thing to happen. So, yeah, very high chance.
More finds, and perhaps proof that this was a monastery. Finds specialist Elias Kupferman has gathered together some of the highlights.
Oh, you've got some beautiful finds here. You've got some copper alloy pins, are these?
Yes.
Would that have been do you think that's a clothing pin or a hair pin?
Maybe if we had nuns here, we believe it could be sort of a tying in a wimple.
So for pinning headgear?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
There's another more decorative one.
That's very decorative.
Yeah.
That's beautiful on the end.
Yes.
Is there anything that's particularly ecclesiastical that's coming out?
There's one thing, and that's a piece of glass.
Yeah.
And it's got this gold trailing on it.
Yeah.
And that proved to be possibly part of an inkwell.
Oh,
so you may have a scriptorium here. It could be writing here of some kind.
Yeah.
So it's quite fascinating, really.
It is. It's just so lovely, isn't it, to have that tiny fragment and to be able to draw that story out of that and to know that you've got literate people here.
Yes.
And often literacy is associated with monastic sites, ecclesiastical sites. That's lovely. Yeah.
The team are also finding early medieval coins.
Do you know when it dates to?
Roughly 8th century.
Yeah. So maybe another connection to Mercia?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
A definite connection with Cynethryth herself is proving elusive, But this dig does mean that we're finally able to start piecing together a picture of a lost monastery.
We knew that there had to be an early medieval monastery at Cookham, and we're starting to see this monastic settlement emerging before our eyes, taking us back to the time when the abbess of this monastery was here, Queen Cynethryth. It's incredible. Coastlines are constantly shape-shifting, and archaeological evidence can be destroyed by erosion or sometimes buried and preserved. And then it can re-emerge centuries later, although it's not always archaeologists who get the first glimpse.
Our next dig takes us just outside of Dungeness, 25 miles southeast of Dover. This headland has one of the largest expanses of shingle in Europe, deep banks of sand and gravel deposited by the ocean over many thousands of years. But half a kilometre back from today's shoreline, a team from Wessex Archaeology are working in a gravel quarry, recovering huge pieces of oak that have been hidden for centuries.
It's not something you see every day. It's really incredible.
Marine archaeologist Andrea Hamill was one of the first to be alerted to the discovery.
People working at the quarry were doing dredging to get gravel, and they came across sort of an obstruction.
Andrea's team sent a mini submersible to the bottom of the pond to inspect the find. It turned out to be a remarkably complete section of a very old ship's hull. The wood preservation is exceptional thanks to the wreck being locked deep beneath layers of protective waterlogged shingle.
Watch your fingers. Looking at the building techniques that were used, it looks like it could be a Tudor vessel. It brings to mind ships like the Mary Rose or especially the Gresham ship.
It's clear the ship dates back several centuries, but just how old is it? They plan to investigate by taking it apart, piece by piece. Disassembling a centuries-old ship in this condition is a rare opportunity for archaeologists like Ben Saunders to learn about the shipwright's craft straight from the source.
It's almost like we're constructing the ship in reverse. We're taking it apart, working out how people built it at the time.
Pinning the massive wooden planks in position are yet more pieces of wood.
This ship is held together with trenels, which is spelt tree nail, and that is because it is literally a tree nail. It's a round piece of oak timber usually, and these are used instead of iron nails because they could use that iron for something else. You could use it for guns, you could use it for cannon, you could use it for whatever. So we're going to take off this ceiling plank. So there's 20 odd trenels in there. Snip out as many of these as possible.
Driving wedges between the timbers allows Ben to cut the trenels.
You hear that little snapping noise just as it goes. Just sort of snipping along with the plank. Hey, it's off. There we go. Right then.
Judging by what is being unearthed, the team estimate the ship would have been more than 25 metres long, weighing perhaps more than 150 tonnes.
The component pieces are massive. The first bit we had was 6.4 metres by 3 metres. That was really, one of the biggest chunks of stuff we've had.
As each huge section is dismantled,
yeah, another one.
The team are revealing surprising construction methods.
That's still got the pine tar and grit and stuff on there. And then for some reason, when they're putting in the filling frames, they're coming through and chipping off all of the pine tar so they can get the filling frames in, which is weird.
Yeah, but see, that's what I think is so fascinating about these shipwrecks, is that they're doing things that you're not expecting. So if you weren't actually taking them apart and looking at them, you'd have no idea that this is what, or how they used to build ships.
Every piece of the wreck is painstakingly recorded with a 3D scanner.
One of the great things about using the scanner is that you can really capture the shape of the timber, and once the scanning is finished, we can create 3D models of the timbers.
This technique will capture even the most minute details.
On this piece of timber here, you can actually still see tool marks along the top, which I think is really exciting. It's really neat to see how people in the past were interacting with the materials and constructing it. And some of the samples we've had still feel so fresh that you can still smell the tar.
The team think the ship is probably from the 16th century, but there is a way to narrow down the date of construction. The team have sent samples of the timber to a lab for dendrochronology dating, and Kat Jarman has come to see how it works.
I've used dates from dendrochronology a lot in my own work, but I've never actually seen how the process works. But today I've come here to meet Robert Howard, who's one of the leading specialists in this field. He's been working on the samples from the shipwreck in Kent, and hopefully he'll be able to tell us not just when those trees grew, but maybe also when the ship was built. So this is very exciting. These are the actual samples from the shipwreck, are they?
That's right, yeah. And we're going to try and date when they were cut and when they went into the shipwreck.
So now you're looking at the rings and then measuring the distance.
Exactly, yes. The width of each ring varies from year to year according to the weather, you see. So that in theory, good weather during the growing season produces wide rings and bad weather produces narrow rings. So there's sort of a climatic fingerprint imprinted on the sample, and we obtain that fingerprint by measuring very carefully, hundredths of a millimetre each time.
It looks quite straightforward. Can I have a go at looking
Please
through it?
feel free, yeah, dive in there, have a little look at that and see what you can see.
Okay, so that's really, really clear, isn't it? And you can see the differences. You've got some really nice and narrow ones.
Yes, yeah, something upset the tree for a few years there. And then further on, the ring is probably widened up again.
Yeah, we've got some nice, big, wide, chunky ones here. It's interesting to think of those people who were there for that year.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
how they would
yes,
experience
I very often think, you know, what was that year like?
Precisely, did they enjoy the nice, long, hot summer they clearly had? So you can see how that gives you a really unique signature.
That's right.
Really,
That's exactly what we're looking for.
But this sequence does not give Rob a date on its own. He uses a dendrochronology database to compare our tree ring sequence with thousands of other wood samples. The database shows where a sample overlaps with older or younger tree ring sequences. Crucially, this includes trees felled in the last few decades. It's these that anchor the tree ring calendar to a precise modern date. So by counting back through this long combined tree ring sequence, wood samples can be precisely placed and dated.
We've got these database of samples that we built up over the last 40 years that span from the present day back to 4,000, 5,000 BC.
Which is astounding. That's 6,000 years of
I know.
history.
That's why it's taken 40 years to build it up.
The database is also regional, so we can factor in the variations in climate found in different parts of the UK. So does that mean actually that you could, by using this method, you could actually give us the origin of the ship?
I hope we can. It would be nice to know where this ship might have come from.
Yeah. Rob compares our sample to different databases from around the world and the UK until he finds the best match in Kent.
This is an average overall Kentish chronology, and the match here is 8.6, so very high, very high. So it does suggest to me this timber that this ship is made of actually grew in Kent.
So we've narrowed down, this is a ship that was built in Kent.
Yeah.
We don't actually have a date for when it was, timbers were felled and when it was built. So can you please tell me?
We can.
By matching our sample to the Kentish Dendrochronology database, we are able to get a precise date for the last tree ring in the sample.
And we've got this sample, sample 4, which has got a last ring date of 1558, but that's not exactly the felling date of the timber.
Okay. Rob must also factor in the oak's outer sapwood to reach his final date projection.
These trees, I think, were felled in round terms between, say, 1560, but no later than 1580, I'd say.
Oh, fantastic, brilliant. So that kind of makes this what? Would that be Elizabethan?
Yes, that's right, that's right. So this ship, in theory, could have been sharing the wind and the waters, you know, with the Armada. And, you know, it might have seen Drake, you know, sailing down the channel. You never know.
Fantastic. So from these little tiny bits of wood, we get that big story of the ship and its significance.
Yes, it's amazing what you can do with a few bits of wood, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Chancing upon an undiscovered Elizabethan shipwreck is an incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But now that every plank has been recorded in detail, the team will rebury the ship close to where it was discovered. Now, Andrea Hamill from The Dig and Historic England maritime archaeologist Anthony Firth are joining me in the Digging for Britain tent. And they've brought a finished 3D model of a section of the hull so we can see it pieced back together.
This section is really beautiful, isn't it? You can really see that construction with the inner planks there.
Yes, and this is the largest section that we found. And some of the individual planks were actually 6 meters. So they're absolutely massive.
Yeah, and at the end of a project like this, you obviously have to think about what you're going to do with the material itself and consider whether it's going to be conserved and placed in a museum, for instance, or whether you preserve it in situ, and sometimes that is the best option.
Yeah, in this case, timbers like this are fantastic in that they preserve their appearance, but if they were to dry out, they would shrink and you'd lose all the detail. So in this case, the best option was to return it to the environment as close as we could to where it was recovered.
Yeah.
And hopefully, if techniques change in the future archaeologists could go back and recover the ship and do more work on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The low hills and flat plains in the south are punctuated with castles. These huge stone fortresses helped successive generations of rulers and powerful landowners control the landscape for centuries. But the most famous castle in the south didn't just control the landscape, it controlled the money. Our next discovery takes us to a magnificent fortress that was at the heart of medieval England, the Tower of London.
The Tower of London was originally a Norman castle, but it's perhaps more famously associated with those stories of scheming, treachery and retribution that attended the reign of Henry VIII. But it was always much more than just a prison somewhere where traitors and heretics were incarcerated and then taken off and beheaded. It was the nucleus of Tudor power.
The Tower of London is still a royal palace and home to the crown jewels. But for more than 500 years, this was also home to the Royal Mint, where rulers like Henry VIII created their coins. This process was always kept behind tightly closed doors.
But Recent renovations to what was the Royal Mint here at the Tower have given archaeologists the unique opportunity to explore what was the heart of Henry VIII's money-making machine.
I've come to meet the Tower's historic buildings curator, Alfred Hawkins, who's been assessing freshly uncovered ruins from beneath the floorboards of one of the yeomen's houses. The ruins date from the 16th century and were once an active part of the Royal Mint during Henry's reign.
Alfred, I'm okay to step down here, am I?
Yeah, of course.
And I have a rare chance to get a very close look.
Alfred, this is quite incredible archaeology that's been sealed under the floor in this building. How did it come to light?
So all of the remains you can see here were excavated in 1976 by workmen, and then this large floor was built over the top of it and just sealed it away for the last 40 years.
And what is it that I'm standing in? What is this?
So you are standing in the assay house, which is where the assaying forge lives.
What we're looking at here are what? Furnaces for the forge?
Yes, so we've got these two kind of keyhole hearths in this kind of nominal furnace part of the ruins, and then there's either a flue or some other channel coming out next to you, and there's another potential flue basically next to your feet that comes out the rear of the furnace.
So there's a void right underneath there.
Yeah, and it goes all the way through to me on this side.
What was going on in this building then? What is this forge for?
So this is the first stage of the creation of coinage. So assaying is the process of either refining gold or silver or testing its purity. So once you have a known purity of silver, you can then send that to be turned into coinage, and you would know all of those coins have the exact same amount of silver in and would be worth the same, and then could be used for trading.
So this isn't really about controlling wealth?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Private merchants brought precious metals like gold or silver to the Tower to sell them to the exchequer of the Mint. And Alfred has given me special access to where it's thought these transactions took place, the Exchequer's office.
Alfred, you walk into this room and your eye is immediately drawn to this end and these beautiful medieval wall paintings. So when do they date to, and what is actually depicted here?
So these date to around the 1390s, and what it depicts is a largely classic crucifixion scene. So you've got John the Baptist.
Oh, that's beautiful, isn't it?
The Virgin Mary kind of wringing her hands in grief, and the Archangel Michael, who's got these fabulous wings and the scales which he would use to weigh the souls of the dead.
So you've got all the right characters here to know that what's missing is actually the crucifixion itself in the centre.
Yeah. In the 16th century, the Tudors decided that it was a bit cold in here.
Yeah.
And smashed through the wall in order to put this large and fairly elaborate fireplace in.
And that's got the remnant of a Tudor rose painting on the front of it. So this represents the ultimate authority.
Yeah, exactly. So if you were tempted to come in here and lie about the purity of your silver or the weight of your gold, all of this kind of iconography is going to be immediately understood by you that if you are lying to the Master of the Mint, who's the representative of the Crown, you're lying to the Crown. If you lie to the Crown, you lie to God. And that's continued with the Tudor rose.
I can imagine being somebody who's a little bit worried about the quality of the metal that I brought into the Royal Mint, and it's gone off to that assaying forge, and I'm sitting in this room looking up at the Archangel Michael with his scales and breaking into a sweat.
Ironically, it was Henry VIII himself who tampered with the purity of silver in his mint. Found in the forge ruins, a collection of crucibles for melting metal is evidence of how coins could be tested and their content manipulated.
Oh, wow. So what have we got then? These look like little crucibles, is that right?
Yes, the 4 different crucibles here, but then we've also got some lovely little things which are called capels.
What are they?
So these are tiny bone ash crucibles, effectively.
So
So what were they doing? They were just taking little samples of any bullion that was coming in?
Yeah, so sometimes these crucibles would burst and you get something like this. So this is a piece of vitrified brick which has been burnt from within the forge, and you can see it's got a splash of gold along here.
Yeah, just this edge here. And then you've got these colours here, which almost look a bit copper-like there. And then the lead is this black, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So you've got these smaller crucibles and the capels for checking the composition of metals that are coming in to the mint. What are these larger vessels for?
So these larger crucibles are to be used for creating copper alloys.
So they are using copper to make coins?
Yeah, so before the Tudor period, a pound of silver is worth a pound. So that's where we get a lot of our measurements from. But as the kind of lavish lifestyle and failed wars of Henry VIII start to have a real impact on the treasury, they start adding copper alloys into silver coins in order to create more coins. And if you have a pound of coins, they're no longer worth a pound. So it's an incredibly dangerous thing to do, as it undermines confidence in your own currency.
Henry VIII multiplied his money, adding more and more copper into the silver coins, watering down their real value. But this sparked runaway inflation. Is Henry VIII really struggling to control the economy?
Yeah, the coffers are effectively empty. So he needs to replace that with new coinage. And all of these items really show us Henry VIII's desperate need to control every aspect of the creation of coinage, and we can see that at the assaying forge as well.
I want to know just how Henry VIII's moneyers managed to pull off his industrial scale fraud. In his garden in the Lincolnshire Fens, historic coin-making expert Dave Grinnell has built his own mini medieval mint. And Stuart Pryor is paying him a visit.
I've come here to meet Dave to see how the old rogue Henry VIII made money out of making money.
We're going to head to the forge initially, where we can start showing how the alloys were made.
Yeah. To investigate how Henry VIII debased the currency, we're going to mint our own dodgy coins.
How's that?
That's perfect.
Right. I need just to take the temperature of the forge up to red heat.
Dave's pop-up forge works on exactly the same principles as the assaying forge at the Tower of London.
I hadn't enough notice to build a complete Tudor forge.
The first step is to get the forge going and heat the crucibles. You're going to be exhausted by the time we finish this.
Oh yeah, hot and thirsty.
Yeah.
The money had an allowance of 10 pints of beer a day when working.
There you go. There you go. Dave bellows air into the base of the furnace, essential for reaching over 961 degrees Celsius, the melting point of silver.
We now can add the silver.
Silver would arrive at the assaying forge in different ways.
So there we've got an assortment of coin, swarf, ore, all ready for melting down. All different grades of silver. So that will go in.
The mint would melt everything they received into pure silver. I can see some impurities in the flames burning off.
That's the copper coming out of the
wow,
of the silver already.
Wow, it's amazing.
But if I put a little bit of lead in,
the lead attaches to the impurities and draws them into the clay of the crucible itself, leaving just silver behind.
So look, see how we're getting on. So in there we've got molten silver.
That's pure silver.
That's roughly 98, 99% pure.
99% pure silver. Yeah. Look at that. Instead of sending almost pure silver to be made into coins, Henry ordered the workers to dilute the silver with less valuable base metals.
But what we would do is add 70% copper to the weight of that silver.
70% copper?
Yeah.
It went debased as much as 70%?
Yes.
Crikey.
You can see the copper dissolving in.
Copper is the perfect metal to combine with silver in coinage. It's cheap, malleable, and roughly the same weight. But with less silver in the coins, they would have less real value.
The wealth of the nation was in its coin. A coin being a piece of precious metal whose intrinsic value is equal to its face value, stamped with an official mark guaranteeing its weight and fineness. So it did exactly what it said on the tin. Well, it did until the time of Henry VIII.
Once the copper and silver have melted together, it can be poured into a solid bar. So this is 30% pure silver and 70%
copper.
Copper.
Yes.
Our bar of debased silver is ready to be turned into coins. But there's one big problem.
Doesn't look like much.
It's the wrong colour. That's a lovely silver bar, perfect for silver coins. That one you can clearly see that there is a portion of copper in it. Dave hammers the bars into thin sheets, uses a punch to cut out the blanks, and finally soaks the blanks in a bath of acid. So, we've been making some blanks. We've got silver and copper coins.
Yes. Oh, there we go. That's one of the blanks we're going to strike the coins from.
That's the silver one, right?
No.
No?
That is 70% copper, 30% silver, but that's just come out of the acid and it's brought the copper out, enriching the surface.
That's how he got away with it?
Yeah, how it was done, yeah.
Soaking the debased blanks in acid leaches any copper from the outer surface, which leaves a shiny silver face and the appearance of a pure silver coin. Ready to strike it?
Yeah, let's strike it. That's the Lloyd Eye.
With a carving of Henry's face on it.
And his titles, yeah. That's called a pile.
Yeah.
The upper die that we hit it with is called a trussel. You
Yeah.
take the hammer. The blanks in there.
Yep.
All you have to do is hit it once as hard as you can.
Right.
Excellent. Now, do you want to take it off and see what you've done?
I hope so. Oh, yeah, okay, terrific.
Look at that. Perfectly struck coin.
And there is Henry VIII in all his glory. The coin looks silver, but it's not silver.
No.
So how did people know it wasn't silver?
Well, when the coin's in circulation, they start to wear.
Yeah.
And the highest point on the coin takes the most wear.
Okay.
Now,
Dave uses a file to simulate a few months of wear and tear, and it reveals Henry VIII's deception.
what do you see on there?
Henry VIII seems to have a copper nose.
Exactly. And he was known as Old Copper Nose.
There you go, that's why.
The high points wear away, revealing the copper inside.
You can really see the copper on it, it's so clever. Henry carried on diluting the silver with copper until eventually foreign merchants refused to accept the debased coins and the economy began to suffer. Even then, Henry's son Edward carried on with the same tricks. It took his daughter Elizabeth to come along and she introduced a mark that you put on coins, because I've got one in my hand here that shows a countermark on the coin of Edward VI, basically showing what his true value is. So it took his daughter Elizabeth to fix the damage that Henry VIII wrought on his own coinage.
Farming in the first millennium BCE, about tools and trade and connections between Britain and the continent. But what was it like to live back then? What was society like? Was it egalitarian or hierarchical? And who exactly was in charge? A careful look at the people themselves in their burials may provide a clue.
So next we journey to Dorset and the village of Winterbourne Kingston, 20 miles west of Bournemouth. These chalky, rolling hills were once home to a mysterious Iron Age tribe known as the Durotrigas. Since 2009, a team from the University of Bournemouth has been exploring this area. uncovering a whole series of ancient settlements dating from the 2nd century BCE into the Roman period. Over the last 13 years, they've been busy uncovering the secrets of the people that once lived in this fertile landscape. I paid a visit as the team investigated one of the large enclosed Iron Age settlements here. Among their pits, in which they found remnants of barley and Iron Age pottery. One of the pits contained the skeleton of a man face down on a pile of animal bones.
How straight?
12 years later, the team is back with dig leader Miles Russell, and they're unearthing 4 more burials, but this time it's the female burials that are causing a stir on site.
A lot of these pits have got bodies, they're in crouched positions, so they're really sort of tightly bound up into a ball. And here we've got a young adult female. She's lying on her left side with the hands up towards the face. And to us, that looks a little bit disrespectful. It looks as if a body's just been bundled into a pit, almost as a way of being disposed of. But I think from the Iron Age perspective, here's a highly respected member of society who is actually being given a lot of care and respect in the pit. So although it looks unusual to us, to them it makes perfect sense, and this is probably an honoured member of the community.
Everyone from Roman writers to 19th century antiquarians assumed that Iron Age societies in Britain were patriarchies, where men ruled the roost. But discoveries here may be turning that assumption on its head.
What we're finding more and more with the Durotrigas is when you do find status goods, they're always with female burials.
So far we've had a whole pot, a glass bead, and we've got a ring potentially coming up there. So yeah, she was clearly someone quite important.
This beautiful glass bead, coloured blue with cobalt oxide, is typically exquisite, as is this delicate iron pin, perhaps once used to tie a shroud around a body.
So the feeling perhaps has been more recently that what we're seeing is that power passes down through the female line and less with the male.
I want to learn more about the status of women in the Durotrigas tribe, so Miles and osteoarchaeologist Megan Russell have come to the Digging for Britain tent. And they've brought the most extraordinary Durotrigas skeleton ever found near to the Winterbourne Kingston site.
So Megan, what about this individual then? Something that's very obvious, these areas of green staining, so presumably that relates to objects that were in her grave?
Yeah, so this individual was actually found by a metal detectorist, and what they first originally found was this big late Iron Age mirror, which you can see appearing just here, and that was placed just around the radius and ulna here. If you can imagine, she was crouched, it was placed just on top, like this.
Not only was this skeleton buried with this extraordinary bronze mirror, there was also this armlet and a stunning thistle brooch.
Green staining is so useful because a lot of the artefacts were displaced during modern ploughing, so these tell us exactly where her artefacts were.
And what kind of biographical detail does this skeleton tell us?
So this individual is a 19 to 25-year-old female. They didn't make it past early adulthood, and we've got almost all of the teeth apart from 2 molars.
Yeah. And her teeth are amazing. I mean, there's hardly any wear on that. That's so unusual for an individual from this era.
So that definitely speaks to her diet and how well she was treated.
And what about any pathology? I mean, she's very young, but are there any signs of disease or injury here?
Yeah, so we've got some woven bone to the mid-shafts of the tibia, which have now healed. And due to the symmetry, we've predicted that these were probably from vitamin C deficiency, so scurvy. And that means that there was a lack of fruit and vegetables in her diet.
Yeah, if you're not getting vitamin C, you're not making structural proteins properly.
Absolutely.
Blood vessels become friable, you get bleeds, and bleeds can turn into bone.
Absolutely. So it's not the lack of those foods, it's not evidence of low socioeconomic status, it's actually that she's very probably high status, but it's more the status is attached to the types of food that she's eating.
Yeah.
So actually higher status, like medieval societies, is probably more animal products and less fruits and vegetables.
And what about these objects though, Miles? What do they tell us about her status in society?
Well, we can say with the mirror, the handle's been replaced on a number of occasions, so it's probably an heirloom. She's got tweezers, a nice sort of personal item as well, and I suspect the brooches. And when we look across all the wealthy burials, there's only potentially one that's male. All the rest, with mirror burials and jewellery and other items, are female.
Really?
So if you're judging perhaps status symbols as an indicator of power or lineage or heritage, then certainly it looks like it's the women who hold the power and the status.
How fascinating to think that we are looking at this society where it's women who clearly have that status, that we're looking at a matriarchal society in Dorset. So this could be Iron Age royalty?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. I mean, this is obviously ongoing work.
Yeah. When you start to pull that data together, Miles and Megan, I want you to come back and tell me all about
Gladly.
it. Next time on Digging for Britain, nearly 300 skeletons discovered under a shopping centre in West Wales.
If I'd known initially that it was going to be this many, I probably would have panicked.
The secrets of a burial chamber more ancient than Stonehenge.
What is really scary is we found something completely unexpected.
And I venture deep to the bottom of a 200-year-old cobalt mine. It's got pretty tight down here.
Oh my God, some of the best stuff you're ever going to see.
Come and search for we who search and looking for us, scour the land. I dig for those whose stories lie with very past, the future's one. And dig for us as we have done